Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's video. So this week we are going into the digestive system, talking about the structures of the digestive system and going over the functions and physiology. The first video here, we are focused just on structures and functions. So we're going to look at the components of the digestive tract, so all the way from the mouth to the anus, all the way through. And then we're going to look at the accessory organs, which are also supporting digestion. And then we're going to look at some of the locations of the sphincters and valves. So here is just a general overview of the digestive tract, also known as the alimentary canal or gastrointestinal tract. So GI tract, digestive tract, alimentary canal, all of that is just the tube going through our body. And along the process of that tube, there's a whole bunch of different events that take place. So That's first, you enter the mouth, you chew the food, salivary glands in here release saliva, helps moisten that food. That food bolus you then swallow down through the pharynx. It then goes down through the esophagus into the stomach. The stomach then churns it up. It becomes something called chyme. That paste-like chyme then enters the small intestine through a valve right here. Small intestine is made up of three sections. There's the duodenum, there's the jejunum, and then the ileum as it moves its way through the small intestine. And that's where all the absorption and then final digestion takes place of all the nutrients you eat. And then you enter the large intestine. Another valve is located right here. This is the appendix. It's an offshoot of the large intestine for bacteria. And then the large intestine has an ascending part, a transverse part, a descending part. Then we have what's called the sigmoid colon, and then there's the rectum, anal canal, and anus. Now, there are other accessory parts to it as well. The liver is producing bile, and bile is then stored in the gallbladder. The gallbladder is then releases that bile into the duodenum. The pancreas is then hiding back in here. The pancreas also releases digestive enzymes to help break down our macromolecules, carbohydrates, proteins, nucleic acids, and some lipases. But here for bile, we'll talk about bile layer, and it's known as a fat emulsifier, and it helps break down lipids. Alrighty, so that was just a quick and general overview of going through the entire system. But first here, so what the mouth does. So the mouth, of course, you're chewing. Chewing is a mechanical breakdown of the food. You're breaking it down so that you can swallow it then. So there's a lot of mechanical breakdown that happens not only in the mouth, but also your stomach also does some mechanical breakdown as well. And we'll talk about that coming up here later. Also, you produce saliva from your salivary glands. Some of this saliva includes things like salivary amylase. So an amylase is an enzyme that breaks down amylose, which is a carbohydrate. You also release a little bit of salivary lipase, and lipase is an enzyme that breaks down lipids. Then the food goes down the pharynx and the esophagus. So it's a event you choose to do when you choose to swallow that food. So that's a voluntary event. Then as soon as that food gets into your pharynx, so up here, the pharynx is the back region of your oral cavity. So that's the pharynx right there. It then passes through. So then you would also have your trachea over here as well. So there's two different routes it could take, and you want the food to go down your esophagus. As soon as it hits the back of your pharynx, smooth muscle takes over the rest of the GI tract. So all of these tubes, all of these hollow organs are all lined with smooth muscle, which helps move it through, and smooth muscle is involuntary. So this pharynx and esophagus then pretty much are just the transporters to send that down to the stomach. And then we get in the stomach. The stomach, of course, is secreting your gastric juices. It's not only hydrochloric acid or HCl here, there's also some other important things that these gastric glands release, such as intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor is something released by cells in the stomach that is required for the absorption of vitamin B12 in the small intestine. Vitamin B12 is really important for red blood cell maturation. So if someone has it's called pernicious anemia, it's an autoimmune disorder, that intrinsic factor is being blocked. And that those people have a vitamin B12 deficiency, and that's a form of anemia. So there are some important things. Intrinsic factor is the only thing that's essential about the stomach for life. Now, the other stuff is just assisting in comfort and breaking down those food particles. And then there is some chemical digestion as well. There are for protein, so these are known as proteases. The one released by the stomach is a pepsin, and that helps break down proteins. HCl can actually helps activate that. HCl, the acidity itself of HCl, also can break down things. The stomach also churns, so there are 3 muscular layers. So most of these hollow tubes have 2 muscular layers. They have a circular layer and a longitudinal layer, and that allows this squeezing movement event called peristalsis and segmentation that we'll talk about in the next video. But the stomach has not only a longitudinal and circular layer here, but it also has an oblique layer. So that allows the stomach to twist like a corkscrew on almost, and allows it to kind of pummel the food. So then you can also absorb some fat-soluble substances, alcohol, aspirin, things like that can be absorbed through the lining of the stomach. And then that all gets down here and becomes a paste-like chyme. And right here we see our second sphincter. This is called the pyloric sphincter. Up here, there's technically a sphincter as well. It's called the cardiac sphincter, and that helps prevent stomach acid from coming up into the esophagus. If you ever regurgitate any stomach acid, you feel that heartburn with the burning of the esophagus. And then we enter the first part of the small intestine here, which is the duodenum. Now we'll talk about how, the pancreas helps to release bicarbonate, which helps neutralize the stomach acid and so forth, because you don't want that stomach acid burning the lining of the small intestine. So 3 parts here to the small intestine. Like I said, there's the duodenum, jejunum, and the ileum. So duodenum is just the first little section here, and then the jejunum is the middle section, and then the ileum is the final section. So the stomach, the surface area of the stomach actually takes up pretty much the surface area, is equivalent to the surface area of a tennis court. Why? Because you need that massive area for all the absorption. So how does it increase its surface area that much? Well, it's very long first, but it also has these modifications. So the lining inside the lumen has all these circular folds here. So these circular folds are where the lining comes out and forms like these little fingers. And then those fingers have fingers. So you see labeled here, all these then push out even more and form what are called villi. So the little villi are more fingers putting out. Then if you look at individual cells, so over here, we're looking at individual cells now, we have what are called microvilli. So on top of the villi, we have villi on top of the cells. Those are microvilli, and that's also known as the brush border. It almost looks like a brush. So what we're looking at here is just one of these cells. So this would be a villi, or villus is a singular right here. Multiple would be a villi. There's our intestinal crypts, which can work part of the immune system and also can release some hormones as well. Within a villi, you have a lacteal, which is part of the lymphatic system. Fat actually gets absorbed into lacteals here for lipids. We'll talk about that in the next video as well. You also have capillaries around these lacteals, because when you absorb things, so all these microvilli are lined with transport channels, and when you bring in the nutrients, most of them go through these cells and through the other side. So here, if we're going through, you would then get taken up into the capillaries and then sent out the veins and to the body. And then it goes through the liver for storage and then to the rest of the body. So that's in essence on how all that works. So here you can see, the little villi and then the folds and then the villi coming out, and then these would have the microvilli on them as well. So these little finger-like projections. Because of that, it increases the surface area tremendously. And then I hinted at some of these are also the accessory organs that feed into the small intestine. So I included them here, not only the small intestine, but also here. You got the salivary glands that we talked about at the beginning. There are 3 main salivary glands, which are labeled here. The big one up here is the parotid gland, and then there's the sublingual gland and submandibular gland. All of these produce saliva, which helps moisten that food. If you ever tried to eat 10 saltines in under a minute, it's impossible because you can't produce enough salivary juice quick enough. So that's the main one for the mouth. And then for the liver, again, the liver is what produces bile. Bile helps in what's known as lipid emulsification, and what that means, it almost acts like a detergent. It helps break apart lipids into smaller droplets that you can then absorb. In the liver, the liver has these little lobules in it, and this is just the design of the liver. Within these lobules, you have all these little cells in here called hepatocytes. And so when blood moves through, gets filtered because the liver is important for filtering blood, and then it goes out and out. But that's just the importance of the liver itself for detoxifying and looking at your blood. But also it produces bile. So these hepatocytes also produce bile, which is produced and comes out and then drains out the bile duct. So bile, again, is produced in the liver, but it's not stored there. It's stored in this little, usually it's always green on models, in a sac called the gallbladder. So bile is just stored in here. It gets ready for release. And when you get the hormone says time to release bile, this muscular sac squeezes and then it comes out the bile duct and then goes out into the duodenum. Excuse me. And then we get to the pancreas. Here you see that common bile duct, which comes down and actually becomes part of the pancreatic duct. And then there's the duodenum of the small intestine. So the bile gets out there. Now the pancreas. So the pancreas, we talked about the pancreas in the endocrine system before. Pancreas has those beta islet and alpha islet cells, and those are what are producing glucagon and insulin. Along with that, we have the acinar cells. The acinar cells are what are producing digestive enzymes. So the proteases, the lipases, nucleases, and even a little bit of lipase. You notice all those words end in ace. If a word ends in ace, it's an enzyme. So breaking down proteins, carbohydrates, nucleic acids, and lipids. So those are all produced by these cells in here. So the acinar cells are then released, and coming out, there's also some bicarbonate ion producing cells, which helps neutralize that stomach acid. Then we get to the large intestine, which is a primary organ of the digestive system. Large intestine, you're doing a little bit of water absorption, but actually most water absorption takes place in the small intestine. So large intestine is mainly just a holding chamber for feces and also a bacterial storehouse. So you have tons and tons of bacteria living in your large intestine. Here it's known as your bacterial flora. And there's a lot of research done about how that's actually really important for our health. Here we see the appendix. You might have heard of appendicitis. It's where that gets blocked and inflamed and could burst. And if it bursts, you get all those bacteria going into the abdominopelvic cavity, which is very, very dangerous. There's another valve right here. So this is the ileum. The first part of the large intestine down here in green is called the cecum. Between the ileum and the cecum, we have the ileocecal valve. So another valve there that tries to prevent that bacteria from going into the small intestine where it can actually cause harm. But then going up, we have the ascending colon, and then the transverse colon going across, descending colon. The part down here, it looks like an S, is called the sigmoid colon, then rectum, anal canal, and then anus. And then there's, of course, sphincters at the end of the anal canal. There's voluntary and involuntary ones. So when we're babies, we use the involuntary ones. When there's just a stretch response down here, the baby goes to the bathroom. But over time, you get cortical control of the voluntary sphincters, which lets you control when you go to the bathroom. And there is a little bit of water absorption that does take place in the large intestine, but like I said, most of the water is reabsorbed in the small intestine. Large intestine is another thing you don't need. It's there for comfort. But there's a procedure that can take the ileum and bring out a hole in your abdominal cavity called an ileostomy. And then if you have to get your large intestine removed, you technically can. Bacteria do make some vitamin K that you do absorb, but besides that, pretty much not much. And we talked about the sphincters and valves throughout. So the lower esophageal sphincter, also known as the cardiac sphincter. So that was cardiac sphincter between the esophagus and the stomach. Pyloric sphincter is at the pyloric end of the stomach between the stomach and the duodenum of the small intestine. We just mentioned the ileocecal valve. That's right up here between the ileum and the cecum. And then we just talked about the anal sphincter. So this was a little introduction video going over the major organs and accessory organs of the digestive system. In the next video, we're going to go more into physiology of how absorption works, the mechanical events and digestive events, and all that sort of fun stuff with the digestive system. But that's all I have for now. Hope you have a great rest of your day. If you watch the next video right after this, I'll see you soon. All right, bye bye.